Chapter 4. Tom Bertram had of late spent so little of his time at home that he could be only nominally missed, and Lady Bertram was soon astonished to find how very well they did even without his father, how well Edmund could supply his place in carving, talking to the steward, writing to the attorney, settling with the servants, and equally saving her from all possible fatigue or exertion in every particular but that of directing her letters. The earliest intelligence of the traveller's safe arrival at Antigua after a favorable voyage was received, though not before Mrs. Norris had been indulging in very dreadful fears, and trying to make Edmund participate them whenever she could get him alone. And as she depended on being the first person made acquainted with any fatal catastrophe, she had already arranged the manner of breaking it to all the others. When Sir Thomas's assurances of their both being alive and well made it necessary to lay by her agitation and affectionate preparatory speeches for a while. The winter came and passed without their being called for. The accounts continued perfectly good, and Mrs. Norris, in promoting gaieties for her nieces, assisting their toilets, displaying their accomplishments, and looking about for their future husbands, had so much to do as, in addition to all her own household cares, some interference in those of her sister and Mrs. Grant's wasteful doings to overlook, left her very little occasion to be occupied in fears for the absent. The Miss Bertrams were now fully established among the belles of the neighborhood, and as they joined to beauty and brilliant acquirements a manner naturally easy and carefully formed to general civility and obligingness, they possessed its favor as well as its admiration. Their vanity was in such good order that they seemed to be quite free from it, and gave themselves no airs, while the praises attending such behavior, secured and brought round by their aunt, served to strengthen them in believing they had no faults. Lady Bertram did not go into public with her daughters. She was too indolent even to accept a mother's gratification in witnessing their success and enjoyment at the expense of any personal trouble, and the charge was made over to her sister, who desired nothing better than a post of such honorable representation, and very thoroughly relished the means it afforded her of mixing in society without having horses to hire. Fanny had no share in the festivities of the season, but she enjoyed being avowedly useful as her aunt's companion when they called away the rest of the family, and, as Miss Lee had left Mansfield, she naturally became everything to Lady Bertram during the night of a ball or a party. She talked to her, listened to her, read to her, and the tranquillity of such evenings, her perfect security in such a tete-a-tete from any sound of unkindness, was unspeakably welcome to a mind which had seldom known a pause in its alarms or embarrassments. As to her cousin's gaieties, she loved to hear an account of them, especially of the balls, and whom Edmund had danced with, but thought too lowly of her own situation to imagine she should ever be admitted to the same, and listened, therefore, without an idea of any nearer concern in them. Upon the whole, it was a comfortable winter to her, for though it brought no William to England, the never-failing hope of his arrival was worth much. The ensuing spring deprived her of her valued friend, the old gray pony, and for some time she was in danger of feeling the loss in her health as well as in her affections, for in spite of the acknowledged importance of her riding on horseback, no measures were taken for mounting her again, because, as it was observed by her aunts, she might ride one of her cousin's horses at any time when they did not want them, and as the Miss Bertrams regularly wanted their horses every fine day, and had no idea of carrying their obliging manners to the sacrifice of any real pleasure, that time, of course, never came. They took their cheerful rides in the fine mornings of April and May, and Fanny either sat at home the whole day with one aunt or walked beyond her strength at the instigation of the other, Lady Bertram holding exercise to be as unnecessary for everybody as it was unpleasant to herself, and Mrs. Norris, who was walking all day, thinking everybody ought to walk as much. Edmund was absent at this time, or the evil would have been earlier remedied, When he returned to understand how Fanny was situated and perceived its ill effects, there seemed with him but one thing to be done, and that Fanny must have a horse was the resolute declaration with which he opposed whatever could be urged by the supineness of his mother or the economy of his aunt to make it appear unimportant. Mrs. Norris could not help thinking that some steady old thing might be found among the numbers belonging to the park that would do vastly well, or that one might be borrowed of the steward, or that perhaps Dr. Grant might now and then lend them the pony he sent to the post. She could not but consider it as absolutely unnecessary and even improper that Fanny should have a regular lady's horse of her own in the style of her cousin's. She was sure Sir Thomas had never intended it, and she must say that, to be making such a purchase in his absence, and adding to the great expenses of his stable at a time when a large part of his income was unsettled, seemed to her very unjustifiable. Fanny must have a horse, was Edmund's only reply. Mrs. Norris could not see it in the same light. Lady Bertram did. She entirely agreed with her son as to the necessity of it, and as to its being considered necessary by his father. She only pleaded against there being any hurry. She only wanted him to wait till Sir Thomas's return, and then Sir Thomas might settle it all himself. He would be at home in September, and where would be the harm of only waiting till September? Though Edmund was much more displeased with his aunt than with his mother, as evincing least regard for her niece, he could not help paying more attention to what she said, and at length determined on a method of proceeding which would obviate the risk of his father's thinking he had done too much, and at the same time procure for Fanny the immediate means of exercise, which he could not bear she should be without. He had 3 horses of his own, but not one that would carry a woman. 2 of them were hunters. The third, a useful road horse, this third he resolved to exchange for one that his cousin might ride. He knew where such a one was to be met with, and having once made up his mind, the whole business was soon completed. The new mare proved a treasure. With a very little trouble, she became exactly calculated for the purpose, and Fanny was then put in almost full possession of her. She had not supposed before that anything could ever suit her like the old gray pony, but her delight in Edmund's mare was far beyond any former pleasure of the sort, and the addition it was ever receiving in the consideration of that kindness from which her pleasure sprung was beyond all her words to express. She regarded her cousin as an example of everything good and great, as possessing worth which no one but herself could ever appreciate, and as entitled to such gratitude from her as no feelings could be strong enough to pay. Her sentiments towards him were compounded of all that was respectful, grateful, confiding, and tender. As the horse continued in name, as well as fact, the property of Edmund, Mrs. Norris could tolerate its being for Fanny's use, and had Lady Bertram ever thought about her own objection again, he might have been excused in her eyes for not waiting till Sir Thomas's return in September, for when September came, Sir Thomas was still abroad, and without any near prospect of finishing his business. Unfavorable circumstances had suddenly arisen at a moment when he was beginning to turn all his thoughts towards England, and the very great uncertainty in which everything was then involved determined him on sending home his son, and waiting the final arrangement by himself. Tom arrived safely, bringing an excellent account of his father's health, but to very little purpose as far as Mrs. Norris was concerned. Sir Thomas's sending away his son seemed to her so like a parent's care under the influence of a foreboding of evil to himself that she could not help feeling dreadful presentiments, and as the long evenings of autumn came on, was so terribly haunted by these ideas in the sad solitariness of her cottage as to be obliged to take daily refuge in the dining-room of the park. The return of winter engagements, however, was not without its effect, and in the course of their progress her mind became so pleasantly occupied in superintending the fortunes of her eldest niece as tolerably to quiet her nerves. If poor Sir Thomas were fated never to return, it would be peculiarly consoling to see their dear Maria well married, she very often thought, always when they were in the company of men of fortune, and particularly on the introduction of a young man who had recently succeeded to one of the largest estates and finest places in the country. Mr. Rushworth was from the first struck with the beauty of Miss Bertram, and, being inclined to marry, soon fancied himself in love. He was a heavy young man, with not more than common sense, but as there was nothing disagreeable in his figure or address, the young lady was well pleased with her conquest. Being now in her 21st year, Maria Bertram was beginning to think matrimony a duty, and as a marriage with Mr. Rushworth would give her the enjoyment of a larger income than her father's, as well as ensure her the house in town, which was now a prime object, it became, by the same rule of moral obligation, her evident duty to marry Mr. Rushworth if she could. Mrs. Norris was most zealous in promoting the match by every suggestion and contrivance likely to enhance its desirableness to either party, and, among other means, by seeking an intimacy with the gentleman's mother, who at present lived with him, and to whom she even forced Lady Bertram to go through 10 miles of indifferent road to pay a morning visit. It was not long before a good understanding took place between this lady and herself. Mrs. Rushworth acknowledged herself very desirous that her son should marry, and declared that of all the young ladies she had ever seen, Miss Bertram seemed, by her amiable qualities and accomplishments, the best adapted to make him happy. Mrs. Norris accepted the compliment, and admired the nice discernment of character which could so well distinguish merit. Maria was indeed the pride and delight of them all, perfectly faultless. An angel, and, of course, so surrounded by admirers, must be difficult in her choice, but yet, as far as Mrs. Norris could allow herself to decide on so short an acquaintance, Mr. Rushworth appeared precisely the young man to deserve and attach her. After dancing with each other at a proper number of balls, the young people justified these opinions, and an engagement, with a due reference to the absent Sir Thomas, was entered into, much to the satisfaction of their respective families, and of the general lookers-on of the neighborhood, who had, for many weeks past, felt the expediency of Mr. Rushworth's marrying Miss Bertram. It was some months before Sir Thomas's consent could be received. But, in the meanwhile, as no one felt a doubt of his most cordial pleasure in the connection, the intercourse of the two families was carried on without restraint, and no other attempt made at secrecy than Mrs. Norris's talking of it everywhere as a matter not to be talked of at present. Edmund was the only one of the family who could see a fault in the business, but no representation of his aunt's could induce him to find Mr. Rushworth a desirable companion. He could allow his sister to be the best judge of her own happiness, but he was not pleased that her happiness should center in a large income, nor could he refrain from often saying to himself, in Mr. Rushworth's company, if this man had not 12,000 a year, he would be a very stupid fellow. Sir Thomas, however, was truly happy in the prospect of an alliance so unquestionably advantageous, and of which he heard nothing but the perfectly good and agreeable. It was a connection exactly of the right sort, in the same county and the same interest, and his most hearty concurrence was conveyed as soon as possible. He only conditioned that the marriage should not take place before his return, which he was again looking eagerly forward to. He wrote in April, and had strong hopes of settling everything to his entire satisfaction, and leaving Antigua before the end of the summer. Such was the state of affairs in the month of July, and Fanny had just reached her 18th year when the society of the village received an addition in the brother and sister of Mrs. Grant, a Mr. and Miss Crawford, the children of her mother by a second marriage. They were young people of fortune. The son had a good estate in Norfolk, the daughter £20,000. As children, their sister had been always very fond of them, But, as her own marriage had been soon followed by the death of their common parent, which left them to the care of a brother of their father, of whom Mrs. Grant knew nothing, she had scarcely seen them since. In their uncle's house they had found a kind home. Admiral and Mrs. Crawford, though agreeing in nothing else, were united in affection for these children, or, at least, were no farther adverse in their feelings than that each had their favorite, to whom they showed the greatest fondness of the two. The Admiral delighted in the boy, Mrs. Crawford doted on the girl, and it was the lady's death which now obliged her protégée, after some months' further trial at her uncle's house, to find another home. Admiral Crawford was a man of vicious conduct, who chose, instead of retaining his niece, to bring his mistress under his own roof, and to this Mrs. Grant was indebted for her sister's proposal of coming to her, a measure quite as welcome on one side as it could be expedient on the other. For Mrs. Grant, having by this time run through the usual resources of ladies residing in the country without a family of children, having more than filled her favorite sitting-room with pretty furniture and made a choice collection of plants and poultry, was very much in want of some variety at home. The arrival, therefore, of a sister whom she had always loved and now hoped to retain with her as long as she remained single was highly agreeable, and her chief anxiety was lest Mansfield should not satisfy the habits of a young woman who had been mostly used to London. Miss Crawford was not entirely free from similar apprehensions, though they arose principally from doubts of her sister's style of living and tone of society, and it was not till after she had tried in vain to persuade her brother to settle with her at his own country house that she could resolve to hazard herself among her other relations. To anything like a permanence of abode or limitation of society, Henry Crawford had, unluckily, a great dislike. He could not accommodate his sister in an article of such importance, but he escorted her with the utmost kindness into Northamptonshire, and as readily engaged to fetch her away again at half an hour's notice whenever she were weary of the place. The meeting was very satisfactory on each side. Miss Crawford found a sister without preciseness or rusticity, a sister's husband who looked the gentleman, and a house commodious and well fitted up, and Mrs. Grant received in those whom she hoped to love better than ever a young man and woman of very prepossessing appearance. Mary Crawford was remarkably pretty. Henry, though not handsome, had air and countenance. The manners of both were lively and pleasant, and Mrs. Grant immediately gave them credit for everything else. She was delighted with each, but Mary was her dearest object, and having never been able to glory in beauty of her own, she thoroughly enjoyed the power of being proud of her sisters. She had not waited her arrival to look out for a suitable match for her. She had fixed on Tom Bertram. The eldest son of a baronet was not too good for a girl of 20,000 pounds, with all the elegance and accomplishments which Mrs. Grant foresaw in her, and being a warm-hearted, unreserved woman, Mary had not been 3 hours in the house before she told her what she had planned. Miss Crawford was glad to find a family of such consequence so very near them, and not at all displeased either at her sister's early care or the choice it had fallen on. Matrimony was her object, provided she could marry well, and having seen Mr. Bertram in town, she knew that objection could no more be made to his person than to his situation in life. While she treated it as a joke, therefore, she did not forget to think of it seriously. The scheme was soon repeated to Henry. "And now," added Mrs. Grant, "I have thought of something to make it complete. I should dearly love to settle you both in this country, and therefore, Henry, you shall marry the youngest Miss Bertram, a nice, handsome, good-humored, accomplished girl who will make you very happy." Henry bowed and thanked her. "My dear sister," said Mary, "if you can persuade him into anything of the sort, it will be a fresh matter of delight to me to find myself allied to anybody so clever, and I shall only regret that you have not half a dozen daughters to dispose of." If you can persuade Henry to marry, you must have the address of a Frenchwoman. All that English abilities can do has been tried already. I have 3 very particular friends who have been all dying for him in their turn, and the pains which they, their mothers, very clever women, as well as my dear aunt and myself, have taken to reason, coax, or trick him into marrying, is inconceivable. He is the most horrible flirt that can be imagined. If your Miss Bertrams do not like to have their hearts broke, let them avoid Henry. My dear brother, I will not believe this of you. No, I am sure you are too good. You will be kinder than Mary. You will allow for the doubts of youth and inexperience. I am of a cautious temper and unwilling to risk my happiness in a hurry. Nobody can think more highly of the matrimonial state than myself. I consider the blessing of a wife as most justly described in those discreet lines of the poet, Heaven's last best gift. There, Mrs. Grant, you see how he dwells on one word, and only look at his smile. I assure you he is very detestable. The Admiral's lessons have quite spoiled him. I pay very little regard, said Mrs. Grant, to what any young person says on the subject of marriage. If they profess a disinclination for it, I only set it down that they have not yet seen the right person. Dr. Grant laughingly congratulated Miss Crawford on feeling no disinclination to the state herself. Oh, yes, I am not at all ashamed of it. I would have everybody marry if they can do it properly. I do not like to have people throw themselves away, but everybody should marry as soon as they can do it to advantage. Chapter 5. The young people were pleased with each other from the first. On each side there was much to attract, and their acquaintance soon promised as early an intimacy as good manners would warrant. Miss Crawford's beauty did her no disservice with the Miss Bertrams. They were too handsome themselves to dislike any woman for being so too, and were almost as much charmed as their brothers with her lively dark eye, clear brown complexion, and general prettiness. Had she been tall, full-formed, and fair, it might have been more of a trial, but as it was, there could be no comparison. And she was most allowably a sweet, pretty girl, while they were the finest young women in the country. Her brother was not handsome, no. When they first saw him, he was absolutely plain, black, and plain, but still he was the gentleman, with a pleasing address. The second meeting proved him not so very plain. He was plain, to be sure, but then he had so much countenance, and his teeth were so good, and he was so well made, that one soon forgot he was plain. And after a third interview, after dining in company with him at the parsonage, he was no longer allowed to be called so by anybody. He was, in fact, the most agreeable young man the sisters had ever known, and they were equally delighted with him. Miss Bertram's engagement made him in equity the property of Julia, of which Julia was fully aware, and before he had been at Mansfield a week, she was quite ready to be fallen in love with. Maria's notions on the subject were more confused and indistinct. She did not want to see or understand. There could be no harm in her liking an agreeable man. Everybody knew her situation. Mr. Crawford must take care of himself. Mr. Crawford did not mean to be in any danger. The Miss Bertrams were worth pleasing and were ready to be pleased, and he began with no object but of making them like him. He did not want them to die of love, but with sense and temper which ought to have made him judge and feel better, he allowed himself great latitude on such points. "I like your Miss Bertrams exceedingly, sister," said he, as he returned from attending them to their carriage after the said dinner visit. "They are very elegant, agreeable girls." "So they are, indeed, and I am delighted to hear you say it. But you like Julia best." "Oh, yes, I like Julia best." "But do you really? For Miss Bertram is in general thought the handsomest." "So I should suppose. She has the advantage in every feature, and I prefer her countenance. But I like Julia best. Miss Bertram is certainly the handsomest, and I have found her the most agreeable, but I shall always like Julia best because you order me." I shall not talk to you, Henry, but I know you will like her best at last. Do not I tell you that I like her best at first? And besides, Miss Bertram is engaged. Remember that, my dear brother. Her choice is made. Yes, and I like her the better for it. An engaged woman is always more agreeable than a disengaged. She is satisfied with herself. Her cares are over, and she feels that she may exert all her powers of pleasing without suspicion. All is safe with a lady engaged. No harm can be done. Why, as to that, Mr. Rushworth is a very good sort of young man, and it is a great match for her. But Miss Bertram does not care 3 straws for him. That is your opinion of your intimate friend. I do not subscribe to it. I am sure Miss Bertram is very much attached to Mr. Rushworth. I could see it in her eyes when he was mentioned. I think too well of Miss Bertram to suppose she would ever give her hand without her heart. Mary, how shall we manage him? We must leave him to himself, I believe. Talking does no good. He will be taken in at last. But I would not have him taken in. I would not have him duped. I would have it all fair and honorable. Oh dear, let him stand his chance and be taken in. It will do just as well. Everybody is taken in at some period or other. Not always in marriage, dear Mary. In marriage especially. With all due respect to such of the present company as chance to be married, my dear Mrs. Grant, there is not 1 in 100 of either sex who is not taken in when they marry. Look where I will, I see that it is so, and I feel that it must be so when I consider that it is, of all transactions, the one in which people expect most from others and are least honest themselves. Ah, you have been in a bad school for matrimony, in Hill Street. My poor aunt had certainly little cause to love the state, but, however, speaking from my own observation, it is a maneuvering business. I know so many who have married in the full expectation and confidence of some one particular advantage in the connection, or accomplishment, or good quality in the person, who have found themselves entirely deceived, and been obliged to put up with exactly the reverse. What is this but a take-in? My dear child, there must be a little imagination here. I beg your pardon, but I cannot quite believe you. Depend upon it, you see but half. You see the evil, but you do not see the consolation. There will be little rubs and disappointments everywhere, and we are all apt to expect too much. But then, if one scheme of happiness fails, human nature turns to another. If the first calculation is wrong, we make a second better. We find comfort somewhere. And those evil-minded observers, dearest Mary, who make much of a little, are more taken in and deceived than the parties themselves. Well done, sister. I honor your esprit du corps. When I am a wife, I mean to be just as staunch myself, and I wish my friends in general would be so too. It would save me many a heartache. You are as bad as your brother, Mary, but we will cure you both. Mansfield shall cure you both, and without any taking in. Stay with us, and we will cure you. The Crawfords, without wanting to be cured, were very willing to stay. Mary was satisfied with the parsonage as a present home, and Henry equally ready to lengthen his visit. He had come, intending to spend only a few days with them, but Mansfield promised well, and there was nothing to call him elsewhere. It delighted Mrs. Grant to keep them both with her, and Dr. Grant was exceedingly well contented to have it so. A talking, pretty young woman like Miss Crawford is always pleasant society to an indolent, stay-at-home man, and Mr. Crawford's being his guest was an excuse for drinking claret every day. The Miss Bertrams' admiration of Mr. Crawford was more rapturous than anything which Miss Crawford's habits made her likely to feel. She acknowledged, however, that the Mr. Bertrams were very fine young men, that 2 such young men were not often seen together even in London, and that their manners, particularly those of the eldest, were very good. He had been much in London, and had more liveliness and gallantry than Edmund, and must, therefore, be preferred, and, indeed, his being the eldest was another strong claim. She had felt an early presentiment that she should like the eldest best. She knew it was her way. Tom Bertram must have been thought pleasant, indeed, at any rate. He was the sort of young man to be generally liked. His agreeableness was of the kind to be oftener found agreeable than some endowments of a higher stamp, for he had easy manners, excellent spirits, a large acquaintance, and a great deal to say. And the reversion of Mansfield Park and a baronetcy did no harm to all this. Miss Crawford soon felt that he and his situation might do. She looked about her with due consideration and found almost everything in his favor: a park, a real park, 5 miles round, a spacious, modern-built house, so well-placed and well-screened as to deserve to be in any collection of engravings of gentlemen's seats in the kingdom, and wanting only to be completely new-furnished. Pleasant sisters, a quiet mother, and an agreeable man himself, with the advantage of being tied up from much gaming at present by a promise to his father, and of being Sir Thomas hereafter. It might do very well. She believed she should accept him, and she began accordingly to interest herself a little about the horse which he had to run at the B races. These races were to call him away not long after their acquaintance began, and as it appeared that the family did not, from his usual goings-on, expect him back again for many weeks, it would bring his passion to an early proof. Much was said on his side to induce her to attend the races, and schemes were made for a large party to them, with all the eagerness of inclination, but it would only do to be talked of. And Fanny, what was she doing and thinking all this while, and what was her opinion of the newcomers? Few young ladies of 18 could be less called on to speak their opinion than Fanny. In a quiet way, very little attended to, she paid her tribute of admiration to Miss Crawford's beauty, but as she still continued to think Mr. Crawford very plain, in spite of her 2 cousins having repeatedly proved the contrary, she never mentioned him. The notice, which she excited herself, was to this effect: "I begin now to understand you all, except Miss Price," said Miss Crawford, as she was walking with the Mr. Bertrams. "Pray, is she out, or is she not? I am puzzled. She dined at the parsonage with the rest of you, which seemed like being out, and yet she says so little that I can hardly suppose she is." Edmund, to whom this was chiefly addressed, replied, "I believe I know what you mean, but I will not undertake to answer the question. My cousin is grown up. She has the age and sense of a woman, but the outs and not outs are beyond me. And yet, in general, nothing can be more easily ascertained. The distinction is so broad, manners as well as appearance are, generally speaking, so totally different. Till now I could not have supposed it possible to be mistaken as to a girl's being out or not. A girl not out has always the same sort of dress. A close bonnet, for instance, looks very demure and never says a word. You may smile, but it is so, I assure you, and except that it is sometimes carried a little too far, it is all very proper. Girls should be quiet and modest. The most objectionable part is that the alteration of manners on being introduced into company is frequently too sudden. They sometimes pass in such very little time from reserve to quite the opposite, to confidence. That is the faulty part of the present system. One does not like to see a girl of 18 or 19 so immediately up to everything, and perhaps when one has seen her hardly able to speak the year before. Mr. Bertram, I dare say you have sometimes met with such changes. I believe I have, but this is hardly fair. I see what you are at. You are quizzing me and Miss Anderson. No, indeed, Miss Anderson, I do not know who or what you mean. I am quite in the dark, but I will quiz you with a great deal of pleasure if you will tell me what about. "Ah, you carry it off very well, but I cannot be quite so far imposed on. You must have had Miss Anderson in your eye in describing an altered young lady. You paint too accurately for mistake. It was exactly so, the Andersons of Baker Street. We were speaking of them the other day, you know. Edmund, you have heard me mention Charles Anderson. The circumstance was precisely as this lady has represented it. When Anderson first introduced me to his family, about 2 years ago, his sister was not out, and I could not get her to speak to me. I sat there an hour one morning waiting for Anderson, with only her and a little girl or two in the room, the governess being sick or run away, and the mother in and out every moment with letters of business, and I could hardly get a word or a look from the young lady. Nothing like a civil answer. She screwed up her mouth and turned from me with such an air. I did not see her again for a 12-month. She was then out. I met her at Mrs. Holford's and did not recollect her. She came up to me, claimed me as an acquaintance, stared me out of countenance, and talked and laughed till I did not know which way to look. I felt that I must be the jest of the room at the time, and Miss Crawford, it is plain, has heard the story. And a very pretty story it is, and with more truth in it, I dare say, than does credit to Miss Anderson. It is too common a fault. Mothers certainly have not yet got quite the right way of managing their daughters. I do not know where the error lies. I do not pretend to set people right, but I do see that they are often wrong. Those who are showing the world what female manners should be, said Mr. Bertram gallantly, are doing a great deal to set them right. The error is plain enough, said the less courteous Edmund. Such girls are ill brought up. They are given wrong notions from the beginning. They are always acting upon motives of vanity, and there is no more real modesty in their behavior before they appear in public than afterwards. I do not know, replied Miss Crawford hesitatingly. Yes, I cannot agree with you there. It is certainly the modestest part of the business. It is much worse to have girls not out give themselves the same airs and take the same liberties as if they were, which I have seen done. That is worse than anything, quite disgusting. Yes, that is very inconvenient indeed, said Mr. Bertram. It leads one astray. One does not know what to do. The close bonnet and demure air you describe so well, and nothing was ever juster, tell one what is expected, but I got into a dreadful scrape last year from the want of them. I went down to Ramsgate for a week with a friend last September, just after my return from the West Indies, my friend Sneed. You have heard me speak of Sneed, Edmund. His father and mother and sisters were there, all new to me. When we reached Albion Place, they were out. We went after them and found them on the pier, Mrs. and the 2 Miss Sneeds, with others of their acquaintance. I made my bow in form, and as Mrs. Sneed was surrounded by men, attached myself to one of her daughters, walked by her side all the way home, and made myself as agreeable as I could. The young lady perfectly easy in her manners, and as ready to talk as to listen. I had not a suspicion that I could be doing anything wrong. They looked just the same, both well-dressed, with veils and parasols like other girls, but I afterwards found that I had been giving all my attention to the youngest, who was not out, and had most excessively offended the eldest. Miss Augusta ought not to have been noticed for the next 6 months, and Miss Sneed, I believe, has never forgiven me. That was bad indeed. Poor Miss Sneed. Though I have no younger sister, I feel for her. To be neglected before one's time must be very vexatious, but it was entirely the mother's fault. Miss Augusta should have been with her governess. Such half-and-half doings never prosper. But now I must be satisfied about Miss Price. Does she go to balls? Does she dine out everywhere, as well as at my sister's? No, replied Edmund, I do not think she has ever been to a ball. My mother seldom goes into company herself, and dines nowhere but with Mrs. Grant, and Fanny stays at home with her. Oh, then the point is clear. Miss Price is not out. Chapter 6. Mr. Bertram set off for, and Miss Crawford was prepared to find a great chasm in their society, and to miss him decidedly in the meetings which were now becoming almost daily between the families, and on their all dining together at the park soon after his going, she retook her chosen place near the bottom of the table, fully expecting to feel a most melancholy difference in the change of masters. It would be a very flat business, she was sure. In comparison with his brother, Edmund would have nothing to say. The soup would be sent round in a most spiritless manner, wine drank without any smiles or agreeable trifling, and the venison cut up without supplying one pleasant anecdote of any former haunch, or a single entertaining story. About my friend, such a one. She must try to find amusement in what was passing at the upper end of the table, and in observing Mr. Rushworth, who was now making his appearance at Mansfield for the first time since the Crawfords' arrival. He had been visiting a friend in the neighboring county, and that friend having recently had his grounds laid out by an improver, Mr. Rushworth was returned with his head full of the subject, and very eager to be improving his own place in the same way, and, though not saying much to the purpose, could talk of nothing else. The subject had been already handled in the drawing-room. It was revived in the dining-parlor. Miss Bertram's attention and opinion was evidently his chief aim, and though her deportment showed rather conscious superiority than any solicitude to oblige him, the mention of Sotherton Court and the ideas attached to it gave her a feeling of complacency which prevented her from being very ungracious. "I wish you could see Compton," said he. "It is the most complete thing. I never saw a place so altered in my life. I told Smith I did not know where I was. The approach now is one of the finest things in the country. You see the house in the most surprising manner. I declare, when I got back to Sotherton yesterday, it looked like a prison, quite a dismal old prison." "Oh, for shame!" cried Mrs. Norris. "A prison indeed? Sotherton Court is the noblest old place in the world." "It wants improvement, ma'am, beyond anything. I never saw a place that wanted so much improvement in my life, and it is so forlorn that I do not know what can be done with it." "No wonder that Mr. Rushworth should think so at present," said Mrs. Grant to Mrs. Norris with a smile, "but depend upon it, Sotherton will have every improvement in time which his heart can desire." "I must try to do something with it," said Mr. Rushworth, "but I do not know what. I hope I shall have some good friend to help me." "Your best friend upon such an occasion," said Miss Bertram calmly, "would be Mr. Repton, I imagine." "That is what I was thinking of. As he has done so well by Smith, I think I had better have him at once. His terms are 5 guineas a day." "Well, and if they were 10, cried Mrs. Norris, "I am sure you need not regard it. The expense need not be any impediment. If I were you, I should not think of the expense. I would have everything done in the best style, and made as nice as possible. Such a place as Sotherton Court deserves everything that taste and money can do. You have space to work upon there, and grounds that will well reward you. For my own part, if I had anything within the 50th part of the size of Sotherton, I should be always planting and improving, for naturally I am excessively fond of it. It would be too ridiculous for me to attempt anything where I am now, with my little half-acre. It would be quite a burlesque. But if I had more room, I should take a prodigious delight in improving and planting. We did a vast deal in that way at the parsonage. We made it quite a different place from what it was when we first had it. You young ones do not remember much about it, perhaps, but if dear Sir Thomas were here, he could tell you what improvements we made, and a great deal more would have been done but for poor Mr. Norris's sad state of health. He could hardly ever get out, poor man, to enjoy anything, and that disheartened me from doing several things that Sir Thomas and I used to talk of. If it had not been for that, we should have carried on the garden wall and made the plantation to shut out the churchyard, just as Dr. Grant has done. We were always doing something as it was. It was only the spring 12-month before Mr. Norris's death that we put in the apricot against the stable wall, which has now grown such a noble tree and getting to such perfection, sir," addressing herself then to Dr. Grant. "The tree thrives well, beyond a doubt, madam," replied Dr. Grant. "The soil is good, and I never pass it without regretting that the fruit should be so little worth the trouble of gathering. Sir, it is a moor park. We bought it as a moor park, and it cost us. That is, it was a present from Sir Thomas, but I saw the bill, and I know it cost 7 shillings, and was charged as a moor park." "You were imposed on, ma'am," replied Dr. Grant. "These potatoes have as much the flavor of a moor park apricot as the fruit from that tree. It is an insipid fruit at the best, but a good apricot is eatable, which none from my garden are." "The truth is, ma'am," said Mrs. Grant, pretending to whisper across the table to Mrs. Norris, "that Dr. Grant hardly knows what the natural taste of our apricot is. He is scarcely ever indulged with one, for it is so valuable a fruit, with a little assistance, and ours is such a remarkably large, fair sort, that what with early tarts and preserves, my cook contrives to get them all." Mrs. Norris, who had begun to redden, was appeased, and, for a little while, other subjects took place of the improvements of Sotherton. Dr. Grant and Mrs. Norris were seldom good friends. Their acquaintance had begun in dilapidations, and their habits were totally dissimilar. After a short interruption, Mr. Rushworth began again. "Smith's Place is the admiration of all the country, and it was a mere nothing before Repton took it in hand. I think I shall have Repton." "Mr. Rushworth," said Lady Bertram, "if I were you, I would have a very pretty shrubbery. One likes to get out into a shrubbery in fine weather." Mr. Rushworth was eager to assure her ladyship of his acquiescence, and tried to make out something complimentary, but between his submission to her taste and his having always intended the same himself, with the superadded objects of professing attention to the comfort of ladies in general, and of insinuating that there was one only whom he was anxious to please, he grew puzzled, and Edmund was glad to put an end to his speech by a proposal of wine. Mr. Rushworth, however, though not usually a great talker, had still more to say on the subject next his heart. Smith has not much above 100 acres altogether in his grounds, which is little enough, and makes it more surprising that the place can have been so improved. Now, at Sotherton, we have a good 700, without reckoning the water meadows, so that I think, if so much could be done at Compton, we need not despair. There have been 2 or 3 fine old trees cut down that grew too near the house, and it opens the prospect amazingly, which makes me think that Repton, or anybody of that sort, would certainly have the avenue at Sotherton down. The avenue that leads from the west front to the top of the hill, you know," turning to Miss Bertram particularly as he spoke, but Miss Bertram thought it most becoming to reply, "The avenue? Oh, I do not recollect it. I really know very little of Sotherton." Fanny, who was sitting on the other side of Edmund, exactly opposite Miss Crawford, and who had been attentively listening, now looked at him, and said in a low voice, "Cut down an avenue. What a pity! Does it not make you think of Cowper? Ye fallen avenues, once more I mourn your fate unmerited." He smiled as he answered, "I am afraid the avenue stands a bad chance, Fanny. I should like to see Sotherton before it is cut down, to see the place as it is now in its old state, but I do not suppose I shall." "Have you never been there?" "No, you never can, and, unluckily, it is out of distance for a ride. I wish we could contrive it." "Oh, it does not signify. Whenever I do see it, you will tell me how it has been altered." "I collect," said Miss Crawford, "that Sotherton is an old place, and a place of some grandeur. In any particular style of building?" "The house was built in Elizabeth's time, and is a large, regular brick building, heavy but respectable-looking, and has many good rooms. It is ill-placed. It stands in one of the lowest spots of the park, in that respect unfavorable for improvement. But the woods are fine, and there is a stream which, I dare say, might be made a good deal of. Mr. Rushworth is quite right, I think, in meaning to give it a modern dress, and I have no doubt that it will be all done extremely well. Miss Crawford listened with submission and said to herself, "He is a well-bred man. He makes the best of it." "I do not wish to influence Mr. Rushworth," he continued, "but, had I a place to new fashion, I should not put myself into the hands of an improver. I would rather have an inferior degree of beauty of my own choice and acquired progressively. I would rather abide by my own blunders than by his. You would know what you were about, of course, but that would not suit me. I have no eye or ingenuity for such matters, but as they are before me, and had I a place of my own in the country, I should be most thankful to any Mr. Repton who would undertake it and give me as much beauty as he could for my money, and I should never look at it till it was complete." "It would be delightful to me to see the progress of it all," said Fanny. "Aye. You have been brought up to it. It was no part of my education, and the only dose I ever had, being administered by not the first favorite in the world, has made me consider improvements in hand as the greatest of nuisances. 3 years ago, the Admiral, my honored uncle, bought a cottage at Twickenham for us all to spend our summers in, and my aunt and I went down to it quite in raptures. But it being excessively pretty, it was soon found necessary to be improved, and for 3 months we were all dirt and confusion, without a gravel walk to step on, or a bench fit for use. I would have everything as complete as possible in the country, shrubberies and flower gardens, and rustic seats innumerable, but it must all be done without my care. Henry is different. He loves to be doing." Edmund was sorry to hear Miss Crawford, whom he was much disposed to admire, speak so freely of her uncle. It did not suit his sense of propriety, and he was silenced till induced by further smiles and liveliness to put the matter by for the present. "Mr. Bertram," said she, "I have tidings of my harp at last. I am assured that it is safe at Northampton, and there it has probably been these 10 days, in spite of the solemn assurances we have so often received to the contrary." Edmund expressed his pleasure and surprise. The truth is that our inquiries were too direct. We sent a servant, we went ourselves. This will not do 70 miles from London, but this morning we heard of it in the right way. It was seen by some farmer, and he told the miller, and the miller told the butcher, and the butcher's son-in-law left word at the shop. I am very glad that you have heard of it, by whatever means, and hope there will be no further delay. I am to have it tomorrow, but how do you think it is to be conveyed? Not by a wagon or cart, oh no, nothing of that kind could be hired in the village. I might as well have asked for porters and a hand-barrow. You would find it difficult, I dare say, just now, in the middle of a very late hay harvest, to hire a horse and cart? I was astonished to find what a piece of work was made of it. To want a horse and cart in the country seemed impossible, so I told my maid to speak for one directly, and as I cannot look out of my dressing-closet without seeing one farmyard, nor walk in the shrubbery without passing another, I thought it would be only ask and have, and was rather grieved that I could not give the advantage to all. Guess my surprise when I found that I had been asking the most unreasonable, most impossible thing in the world, had offended all the farmers, all the laborers, all the hay in the parish. As for Dr. Grant's bailiff, I believe I had better keep out of his way. And my brother-in-law himself, who is all kindness in general, looked rather black upon me when he found what I had been at. You could not be expected to have thought on the subject before, but when you do think of it, you must see the importance of getting in the grass. The hire of a cart at any time might not be so easy as you suppose. Our farmers are not in the habit of letting them out. But in harvest it must be quite out of their power to spare a horse. I shall understand all your ways in time, but coming down with the true London maxim that everything is to be got with money, I was a little embarrassed at first by the sturdy independence of your country customs. However, I am to have my harp fetched tomorrow. Henry, who is good nature itself, has offered to fetch it in his barouche. Will it not be honorably conveyed? Edmund spoke of the harp as his favorite instrument and hoped to be soon allowed to hear her. Fanny had never heard the harp at all and wished for it very much. "I shall be most happy to play to you both," said Miss Crawford, "at least as long as you can like to listen, probably much longer, for I dearly love music myself, and where the natural taste is equal, the player must always be best off, for she is gratified in more ways than one. Now, Mr. Bertram, if you write to your brother, I entreat you to tell him that my harp is come. He heard so much of my misery about it. And you may say, if you please, that I shall prepare my most plaintive airs against his return, in compassion to his feelings, as I know his horse will lose. If I write, I will say whatever you wish me, but I do not, at present, foresee any occasion for writing. No, I dare say, nor if he were to be gone a 12-month, would you ever write to him, nor he to you, if it could be helped. The occasion would never be foreseen. What strange creatures brothers are! You would not write to each other, but upon the most urgent necessity in the world, and when obliged to take up the pen to say that such a horse is ill, or such a relation dead, it is done in the fewest possible words. You have but one style among you. I know it perfectly. Henry, who is in every other respect exactly what a brother should be, who loves me, consults me, confides in me, and will talk to me by the hour together, has never yet turned the page in a letter. And very often it is nothing more than, "Dear Mary, I am just arrived. Bath seems full, and everything as usual. Yours sincerely." That is the true manly style. That is a complete brother's letter. "When they are at a distance from all their family," said Fanny, coloring for William's sake, "they can write long letters." "Miss Price has a brother at sea," said Edmund, "whose excellence as a correspondent makes her think you too severe upon us." "At sea, has she? In the King's service, of course." Fanny would rather have had Edmund tell the story, but his determined silence obliged her to relate her brother's situation. Her voice was animated in speaking of his profession and the foreign stations he had been on, but she could not mention the number of years that he had been absent without tears in her eyes. Miss Crawford civilly wished him an early promotion. "Do you know anything of my cousin's captain?" said Edmund. "Captain Marshall, you have a large acquaintance in the Navy, I conclude." "Among admirals, large enough, but, with an air of grandeur, we know very little of the inferior ranks. Post-captains may be very good sort of men, but they do not belong to us. Of various admirals I could tell you a great deal, of them and their flags, and the gradation of their pay, and their bickerings and jealousies, but, in general, I can assure you that they are all passed over, and all very ill-used. Certainly my home at my uncle's brought me acquainted with a circle of admirals. Of rears and vices I saw enough. Now do not be suspecting me of a pun, I entreat." Edmund again felt grave, and only replied, "It is a noble profession." "Yes, the profession is well enough under two circumstances, if it make the fortune, and there be discretion in spending it. But, in short, it is not a favorite profession of mine. It has never worn an amiable form to me." Edmund reverted to the harp, and was again very happy in the prospect of hearing her play. The subject of improving grounds, meanwhile, was still under consideration among the others, and Mrs. Grant could not help addressing her brother, though it was calling his attention from Miss Julia Bertram. "My dear Henry, have you nothing to say? You have been an improver yourself, and from what I hear of Everingham, it may vie with any place in England. Its natural beauties, I am sure, are great. Everingham, as it used to be, was perfect in my estimation. Such a happy fall of ground, and such timber! What would I not give to see it again?" "Nothing could be so gratifying to me as to hear your opinion of it," was his answer, "but I fear there would be some disappointment. You would not find it equal to your present ideas." In extent, it is a mere nothing. You would be surprised at its insignificance. And as for improvement, there was very little for me to do. Too little. I should like to have been busy much longer. You are fond of the sort of thing? Said Julia. Excessively. But what with the natural advantages of the ground, which pointed out, even to a very young eye, what little remained to be done, and my own consequent resolutions, I had not been of age 3 months before Everingham was all that it is now. My plan was laid at Westminster, a little altered, perhaps, at Cambridge, and at 21 executed. I am inclined to envy Mr. Rushworth for having so much happiness yet before him. I have been a devourer of my own. Those who see quickly will resolve quickly and act quickly, said Julia. You can never want employment. Instead of envying Mr. Rushworth, you should assist him with your opinion. Mrs. Grant, hearing the latter part of this speech, enforced it warmly, persuaded that no judgment could be equal to her brother's, and as Miss Bertram caught at the idea likewise and gave it her full support, declaring that, in her opinion, it was infinitely better to consult with friends and disinterested advisers than immediately to throw the business into the hands of a professional man, Mr. Rushworth was very ready to request the favor of Mr. Crawford's assistance. And Mr. Crawford, after properly depreciating his own abilities, was quite at his service in any way that could be useful. Mr. Rushworth then began to propose Mr. Crawford's doing him the honor of coming over to Sotherton and taking a bed there, when Mrs. Norris, as if reading in her 2 nieces' minds their little approbation of a plan which was to take Mr. Crawford away, interposed with an amendment. There can be no doubt of Mr. Crawford's willingness. But why should not more of us go? Why should not we make a little party? Here are many that would be interested in your improvements, my dear Mr. Rushworth, and that would like to hear Mr. Crawford's opinion on the spot, and that might be of some small use to you with their opinions. And, for my own part, I have been long wishing to wait upon your good mother again. Nothing but having no horses of my own could have made me so remiss. But now I could go and sit a few hours with Mrs. Rushworth while the rest of you walked about and settled things. And then we could all return to a late dinner here, or dine at Sotherton, just as might be most agreeable to your mother, and have a pleasant drive home by moonlight. I dare say Mr. Crawford would take my 2 nieces and me in his barouche, and Edmund can go on horseback, you know, sister, and Fanny will stay at home with you. Lady Bertram made no objection, and everyone concerned in the going was forward in expressing their ready concurrence, excepting Edmund, who heard it all and said nothing.